So Dragon Kaneki is a product in the story that never truly gets its full explanation. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of blanks in between that paint some sort of vivid picture to some sort of understanding, yet you don't necessarily get the full context for it. With that said, Dragon has kind of three massive or main revolving parts, which are built up of Kaneki, Rize, and Rize's specifically pure RC cells. To start from the beginning, this was a plan that Furuta had in motion for a very long time. This is a plan that Furuta put a lot of attention into to obviously creating and constructing a birthing tool which would evidently later on give birth to Rize. The only reason this is possible is a couple of different things. One, because of Kaneki's, I guess, very raw experimentation process. Two, because his experimentation process takes place with Rize's RC cells. And three, Furuta's procedure of generating enough food for Kaneki, which also hold Rize's RC cells, and these are known as the Ogai Squad members. What's very interesting about that whole idea is that Furuta pushed Kaneki into a corner that he himself had constructed. This led Kaneki down a path of desperation, something that would force him to cannibalize and gain enough power to defeat his enemies. So after the very vicious defeat that Kaneki had against Suzuya and Hanbi, his only option was to cannibalize on everything close. And funny enough, that corner that Furuta constructed was filled with Ogai Squad members and Rize's specifically RC cells. This is where Dragon is kind of born, a monstrosity of mutated RC cells going out of control. Kaneki completely changes almost instantly after cannibalizing on enough RC cells, and it kind of just snowballs from there. Evidently, I don't think this would be possible without Rize's RC cells because they are very aggressive in nature, they mutate very quickly, and this is evident in a lot of different factors. But obviously Kaneki, after cannibalizing on so many and then kind of growing to such an extent, the intake of different RC cells also comes and plays a factor, something that makes him a lot bigger as well as his normal RC cells, or the Rize specific ones I should say, start to mutate and become a lot more aggressive with the other abundance of RC cells coming into play. I think it should be noted that Kaneki is Dragon, but at the same time isn't. Kaneki plays a nucleus, a host, for Dragon to be created off of. And at the beginning phase, Kaneki himself was very conscious of the things that were happening around him, as he kind of was Dragon at that time. However, once it gets to a size out of Kaneki's realm, out of his control, he takes a back seat and plays that nucleus, he plays that host. With that being said, he is not the only host. Throughout the process of Dragon growing bigger and bigger, other hosts and nuclei are needed to sustain such a large structure. This comes in the form of Kaneki's quote-unquote clone, beings that Dragon at the time was subconsciously creating to obviously sustain the structure, to continue growing bigger and bigger and kind of hold the RC cells in a respectable way. This is not something Kaneki was doing himself, this is not something that was in Kaneki's control. He was playing the singular first nucleus that Dragon was built off. This pre-context is needed because of what Dragon turns into. It's not necessarily a monster or a being that's going to destroy the world. No, it is a tool to give birth to something else entirely, to create a very specific life, and that is known as Rize. We find out the fundamental process of what Dragon does, how it actually works, and this comes in a couple of different forms. First of all, like I said, the whole product of what Dragon is creating a specific being. To create this said specific being, a lot of RC cells are needed, especially because you're creating this person from scratch. This was never fully explained, yet I do have some sort of explanation for it in terms of how Rize was specifically created to look exactly the same, have some sort of similar features, as well as her supposed memories at the end of the story. I'll get onto that in a little bit. In that instance, it creates these things called orphans, these mini monstrosity looking beings that are birthed from Dragon to go out and kill people and bring them back so Dragon can absorb them. To double back on top of that, some of those orphans would hold a virus or a sack of Rize's RC cells that when killed would explode into the public and turn them into ghouls. They would start to go through the ghoulification process. This kind of showcases straight away how vicious Rize's RC cells were. They were very aggressive and they mutated very quickly to the extent where the human population, once kind of hit with this quote-unquote virus, humans would start to go through the ghoulification process. Now, this is only possible because it is known that humans have a very low portion of RC cells. Do note, however, that humans do not have the ability to multiply their RC cells. So if they have 50 RC cells, they will continuously have 50 throughout their entire life, give or take. There is not a reproduction or multiplying system that comes into factor with their cells. Rize's RC cells activate that to an aggressive amount. So the 50 RC cells that the human bodies have, more or less, start to aggressively multiply, and they forcefully go through a ghoulification process. Those said orphans or beings that Dragon created then digest those humans or eat them, digesting those new abundance of RC cells, go back and then get digested by Dragon, thus kind of fueling the process, and the cycle repeats itself to make Dragon a lot more bigger and bring back a lot more RC cells. All of those RC cells that they bring back funnel into the creation of Rize and potentially what she could have been. So now that you know Kaneki's context, you know what Dragon is specifically, what is Rize and what's so important about her RC cells? Now, like I said before, Dragon specifically creating Rize is a very interesting thing. Creating her body the exact same way, creating her facial features, even bringing back her memories, how is that even possible? Some sort of explanation I can give to this is that RC cells have genetic tracing. I'm not too sure of the realistic terms for it, but to kind of put simply in manner, RC cells are specific to one ghoul. To kind of break this down again, if I were to take a blood sample of Rize, let's say, and then kind of feed more RC cells into it over time, if I have the right DNA and if I have the right RC cells and I keep, feeding it constantly, those RC cells would recreate Rize. That is kind of the fundamental process of what Dragon is, just on a much more obscure scale, and it's kind of somewhat transcending immortality. What's never really explained is why Furuta needed Kaneki. Why couldn't he use an Ogai squad member as a host? Why couldn't he create another being that was similar to Kaneki to use them as a host? I think what comes into play here is the one-eyed ghoul aspect, and I correlate this back to the Naga serpent, which was the Professor Dragon, if you will, which was a pure-blooded one-eyed ghoul from the Washu family. So to kind of picture it in a better way, imagine Rize being a one-eyed ghoul. I don't think necessarily Naga needed a host or two different beings, because it goes with the idea that Naga, being the one-eyed ghoul with pure Washu blood cells, very aggressive, he could most likely give birth to himself, if that makes sense. The reason why I say this also, and like kind of the specifics and logistics of it, is the very small portion of the human DNA that one-eyed ghouls have. Kaneki has that, and this is somewhat backed up by the clones that Kaneki produces to help Dragon function. On top of that, when Kaneki gets pulled out of Dragon, his human DNA is completely gone. His body is completely reformed in a different way. This showcases how pure and how incredibly unique Rize's RC cells were. This is the first time we ever get to see kind of specific pure breeding at its purity. Kaneki, at the end of the day, wasn't his own ghoul. He was a ghoul with Rize's RC cells, which are very powerful. So in that aspect, he's very similar to the Naga serpent, which was a one-eyed Washu ghoul. Just in this case, instead of Kaneki being reborn, it's Rize, because obviously Kaneki's ghoul RC cells are not specific to him. They're specific to Rize still. So with all that knowledge kind of sitting there and all funneling back into the creation of Rize, we get to the topic of immortality. Now this was never really confirmed, but with the idea that Rize could be created the exact same way in both image, personality, style, and all of her appearances and everything above, just from RC cells, it was also somewhat played upon that her memories returned, because she had a very small and somewhat conscious conversation with Kaneki without verbally speaking to him. Now this happens two different ways. When Kaneki is approaching Dragon, he feels a presence from Rize. This is something obviously that he is entangled with, something that he's connected to. Secondly, the translation at the end of the story with Kaneki kind of meeting Rize and defeating her, in the context of what it was supposed that the person talking was actually Rize. It wasn't verbal response, but more so something that they were kind of connected on a wavelength, if you will. If that confirms that Rize had her memories from before, this process is, the equivalent of immortality. Rize could evidently be born again time and time over. Just by taking a portion of her RC cells and creating a structure similar to Dragon, she could be born again. There's even the idea of what she potentially potentially could have been after coming out of Dragon, which could have been a immortal being, something that transcends all ghouls and everything that we know of. In total, this works with the whole context of the story, with what the V organization were doing, obviously purifying themselves or blessing themselves, taking away their aging process and making them kind of full ghoul to an extent. Ishida very much so tiptoed around the idea of immortality, being reborn, and just the showcase with what Rize was and even how Kaneki was after he came out of Dragon. As you can see, there is a lot of moving parts, a lot of different cogs with information in them that never necessarily get explained, but hopefully this video gives you some sort of clarification. I understand it's still probably very confusing, but overall that's basically it. That's all the information I can give. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, but I'm actually going to end it here, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.